Welcome in this video of the House of Asian Cinema. Alongside the samurai and the ninja, the Yakuza are a staple of popular folklore when discussing Japan. Described both as authentic Robin Hood, always ready to use their katana to protect the weak, and as sadistic and violent gangsters ready to do anything for money in their elegant black costumes, the spectrum is wide when it comes to the imagery the Yakuza carry with them. Cinema has greatly contributed to these two contradictory orientations, with several hundreds of titles around these criminal organizations produced. In this video, we will check the evolution of Yakuza in Japanese cinema on a period more than 70 years long and try to understand what led to these changes.
どうかお手を挙げなすって。
アンさんからお手を挙げなすって。
それでは困ります。
じゃあご一緒にお手を挙げなすって。ありがとうございます。
Like Italian mafia or Chinese triads, it is hard to distinguish between fiction and reality when it comes to the history of the Yakuza. Thus, all information on the subject have to be taken with a grain of salt. The first trace of organized criminal bands with some characteristics close to the Yakuza can be found at the end of the Muromachi period and the early stage of the Tokugawa, both in the Kabuki Mono, also known as the Hatamoto Yako, some bands of outlaws with eccentric clothings, and in the Machi Yako, some urban militias set up to repel criminals such as the Kabuki Mono. These two types of organized groups disappear at the end of the 17th century once the Tokugawa firmly ruled the whole country. But they were popularized in mass culture, from literature to street performances, transforming them into heroes. Their legacy was partially inherited by two different factions during the 18th century. First, the Tekiya, some itinerant traders who didn't hesitate to use violence to protect their goods and territory or get rid of the competition. In order to strengthen their capacities, the Tekiya started gathering and followed a strict hierarchy with an Oyabun at its head. The other faction with a similar evolution during that time were the Bakuto, gamblers. Some of them took roots in cities and villages to open popular gambling dens, or by collaborating with corrupted officials to scam big public construction site workers. Still at the margin of society, they had no problem to use their muscles to exercise violence to be obeyed. In a similar dynamic as the Tekiya, the Bakuto banded together to carry more weight and influence. Both were especially present on the Tokaido Highway, the main commercial artery of Japan during the Edo era. Some of the most famous characteristics of the Yakuza come from that time. Their name, for example, comes from the word of Bakuto, being a losing combination at the popular card game Hanafuda. Likewise, amputating a portion of the finger as a punishment, a practice known as Yubitsume, also comes from the gamblers. Finally, the elaborate tattoos displayed by the Yakuza are left over from Bakuto as well. Back in time, the shogunate used tattoo as a punishment, in order to mark and single out the criminals. But the gamblers transformed them into a proud symbol of membership, making them more complex and flamboyant. The upheaval of the 19th century with the end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the Meiji Restoration were a time of opportunities for the Bakuto and the Tekiya. Their expertise in violence was put to good use during the Civil War, but also during the early years of the new democracy, thanks to the very confrontational climate of Japanese politics back then. And if they had to reduce their traditional activities such as gambling following a 1884 law banning it, they invested other fields thanks to the economic transformation of the country, such as controlling docking operations, real estate, or transportations. The economic development of the country, their connection with influential political figures, especially on the far right side, allowed the Yakuza to prosper and make their presence official. In 1919, the Dai Nippon Kokusai Kai, or Great Japan National Essence Society, was formed, an organization composed mainly from criminals and sanctioned by the conservative elite. Its goal was to fight against the growing influence of their leftist counterparts, including through violence. Some Oyabun even managed to get elected to the parliament, such as Yoshida Isokishi or Ora Senosuke. Many Yakuza also embraced the imperialist ideal and extended their influence to Taiwan, Korea, and Manchuria. At the same time, thanks to influential artists such as writer Shin Hasegawa, their image remained quite positive, as they were most of the time described as virtuous people, using violence only to help the poor and following a strict code of honor. Cinema of the time followed suit and started depicting noble and heroic Yakuza, some of them based on Hasegawa's writings. That was the case of Bakuto Shuji Kunisada, which mythical feats were immortalized on film in 1927 by Daisuke Ito in a diary of Shuji's travel. Unfortunately, the war and the following purge by the occupation authorities led to the destruction of most of the films produced in the first half of the 20th century. Following the defeat of the Second World War, Japan was occupied by the US and started its difficult process of rebuilding. In this rough new environment, Yakuza prospered again, becoming the masters of the many black markets mushrooming around the country and battling out against the former colonized minorities still present on Japanese soil. Their influence also grew once the occupation authorities decided to switch their stance, having originally been tough toward nationalistic organizations, including the Yakuza, but then choosing to target leftist associations instead, a new fight in which the Yakuza became privileged partners. Once the occupation was over, the Yakuza found back the position they had before the war, with political platforms close from the ones they had at the beginning of the Showa era, on a quasi-monopoly in racket and other kind of traffic. When it comes to cinema, during the occupation, Yakuza were almost banned from the big screens of the archipelago. When they did appear in films, they were heavily criticized, such as in Akira Kurosawa's Drunken Angel. The return to Japanese sovereignty brought the Yakuza back in the theaters. While some filmmakers maintain a critical stance reminiscent of the occupation, such as Masaki Kobayashi with his Black River, this approach evolved quickly with Yakuza shown in a more positive light. As soon as 1953, a 9-film series on Jitsuroku Shimizu, another legendary figure of the 19th century Bakuto, was produced. With the war after effects fading and a new prosperity firmly taking shape in the Japan of the 1960s, heroic Yakuza became more and more popular. One example was the famous Satoshi, a chivalrous Bakuto always willing to help the weak, and who hides behind his blindness and impressive intellect and sword mastery. Everything was ready for a maximum iconization of this Yakuza of mythology. In 1963, Tadashi Sawashima's Theater of Life was released in Japan. Produced by Toei, this adaptation of a novel by Shiro Ozaki is set during the Taisho era and see Ashikaku, a young Yakuza, fall in love with the beautiful Otoyo. But she's indebted to Ashikaku's gang. The couple flee together and find shelter in a small city on another Yakuza clan's territory. When the said clan is under attack from a rival gang, Ashikaku follows his duty and helps them in their fight. He's sent to jail and leaves Otoyo to fend for herself. A big box office success, the film was the start of the Ninkyo Eiga craze, a subgenre of the Yakuza film which enjoyed a huge popularity for almost 10 years and led to the production of over 100 films. Usually set during the Meiji or Taisho era, the Ninkyo Eiga depicts heroic Yakuza facing a moral dilemma between the Giri, the sense of duty part of the Yakuza code, and the Ninjo, the personal desire and ambitions of the individual. This dilemma is almost systematically solved to the advantage of the former in a bloody final. Theater of Life not only started the Ninkyo trend, but also revealed the two biggest stars of this subgenre, namely Koji Tsuruta and Ken Takakura. Those two actors played heroic Yakuza in numerous Toei productions of the 60s until the early 1970s. To name a few, we have the Bakuto series for Tsuruta with its 10 films, or the brutal tales of chivalry for Takakura, 9 episodes strong. These two actors really embodied and still do today the spirit of Ninkyo for Japanese audience, including the Yakuza themselves. Even if the 1960s were the starting point of a slow but irremediable decline of Japanese studio, they still had plenty of power when the Ninkyo wave carried off everything in its path. they were still able to provide decent budgets and assemble talented crews for their productions. So much so, films of this subgenre always have great photography, good artistic direction, and excellent casting. If we add the fact that they are usually short in length, there is no doubt that Ninkyo Eiga were quality films, highly entertaining. Nonetheless, they suffered from two main flaws. The first one is their repetitivity. Even if there were attempts to bring a few originalities from one production to another, the main storyline was usually the same every time. The chivalrous hero, true to the idealist values of gangsters, found himself having to help an honorable Yakuza clan in trouble with another unscrupulous organization. Our modern knight tried to solve the problem according to the Yakuza code, but the deviousness of the opponents always led to a final punitive expedition to annihilate them. During the course of the film, he found love, a love he could not assume, and crossed paths with the chivalrous alter ego working for the wrong side or seeking to avenge an old wound. The other problem with Ninkyo is its ideological message. The vision of Yakuza being proposed here is highly positive. Some clans are shown under a negative light, but they are the ones who don't follow the traditional rules, usually under the corrupting influence of Western values linked to the industrialization, and they always end up being punished for their dishonorable acts. Moreover, the opposition between two semi-societies in industrial fields, while partially true to the reality of the modernization drive of the Meiji era, was also a way to address the intense social struggles Japan was experiencing in the 1960s. Back then, workers and students were facing big bosses and conservative elites, the Yakuza having clearly chosen to side with the latter, acting as strikebreakers. There is a bit of this ultra-conservative ideology in the Ninkyo Eiga, with the praising of old-school paternalistic bosses and a society with strict hierarchy. To have films so positive toward gangsters was no surprise given the close connection some studio executives were enjoying with powerful Oyabuns. Koji Shundo, for example, the head honcho of Yakuza film at Toei, was strongly suspected from being a Yakuza himself. Other members of the studios and show business personalities appeared in many events organized by the Yakuza. To have a good idea of Ninkyo Eiga, aside from the other films already mentioned, you can check Seijun Suzuki's Tattooed Life, with its acute romanticism and its very impressive impressionistic final, or Hideo Gosha's The Wolves, the final firework of the genre by a filmmaker able to transcend the codes of Ninkyo. Exploited like crazy for almost 10 years, the Ninkyo Eiga ended up losing the audience interest in the early 1970s. The genre started to take a new shape. In a decade defiant toward any kind of authorities all over the world, and during which cynicism and disillusion ruled, Japan was no exception. Its cinema became both fiercely anti-establishment and blatantly commercial, upping the violence and sex. Yakuza films were influenced by this state of mind and transformed from Ninkyo Eiga into Jitsuroku. Contrary to its 1960s alter ego, the Jitsuroku is usually set in modern Japan or in a close past, most likely shortly after the end of the Second World War. It is often based on real cases and is much more realistic, more cynical some would say, both in its description of the Yakuza world as well as in its cinematic style, with handheld camera as the shooting style of choice. The flag bearer of this new trend was Kinji Fukasaku. Fukasaku had already started to subvert the Japanese Yakuza film and bring them toward the Jitsuroku with works such as Wolves, Pigs and Men in 1964, or in his Ninkyo such as Japan Organized Crime Boss or Gambler's Ceremony of Disbanding. He really started to lay the foundation of the subgenre as soon as 1971 with Sympathy for the Underdog, in which a Yakuza clan decided to relocate to Okinawa after having been expelled from their Yokohama base by a rival gang. But it is without a doubt the Battle Without Honor on Humanity series, which he made between 1973 and 1974, which was the death knell to the Ninkyo Eiga. Based on a real gang war centered on Oyabun Kozo-mino, which happened in the Hiroshima prefecture, the series covers 3 decades of post-war Japan and is the absolute reference of Jitsuroku Eiga. Cynical in its treatment of the Yakuza code and their values, judicious in its descriptions of the links between organized crime and the political world and the police, aggressive in its violent reckonings, and disillusioned about human nature, Kinji Fukasaku signed one of the masterpieces of the Yakuza film genre. The series is also dominated by the charismatic Bunta Sugawara playing Hirono, a Yakuza much more ambiguous and aggressive than those played by Takakura and Tsuruta before him. Other filmmakers followed in the footsteps of Fukasaku, even if the Jitsuroku did not enjoy a similar producing favor as the Ninkyo. Moreover, if there are some very enjoyable films, almost none managed to match the high degree of quality of the ones made by Fukasaku. Curious people can still have a go at Sadao Nakajima's Okinawa Yakuza War, or Hideo Gosha's Violent Street. The end of the 1970s, early 1980s marked another transitional period for the small world of Yakuza films. In turn, the Jitsuroku ran out of steam and producers tried a new approach to keep the audience interested, hiring even bigger stars. But the result ended up for the most part very boring and wordy, such as Sadao Nakajima's Japanese Dawn trilogy with Toshiro Mifune and Bunta Sugawara. At the same time, Japanese cinema audience evolved. While in the 1970s the majority of the audience was made of young men, women became the main cinema audience. Realizing this phenomena, producers and filmmakers tried to adjust their stories consequently. They put more emphasis on love stories and character development rather than violence and the usual machismo of the genre. If that didn't lead to a real renewal of the genre, and in many ways this decade was a low point for Yakuza films, there were still some quality works being produced during that time. One can look at Masato Harada's Heartbreak Yakuza, about the love story of a Yakuza killer with his childhood friend, Riichi Takamori's Anego, on the quest for revenge of a Yakuza wife whose husband has been assassinated, or Seiji Izumi's Voswell Yakuza, constantly oscillating between parody and respect of the genre. But the director who was the best able to deal with this change of style was Hideo Gosha. Already responsible of one of the very best Ninkyo and a flawed but entertaining Jitsuroku, he found in this feminization of the genre an opportunity to give his best. Thus, he made a fascinating Onimasa and a powerful Oyabun during the Taisho era, as seen through the eyes of his adopted daughter. Moreover, he was one of the rare filmmakers of that decade to successfully start a new series, the Yakuza Wives series, on the wives and girlfriends of the members of the Japanese organized crime. 16 episodes strong, the first one, the only one directed by Gosha, has a strong performance from Shima Iwashita as an authentic Yakuza Iron Lady. The 1990s were a decade of crisis for Japan following the bursting of its economic bubble. This violent recession of the Japanese economy also impacted the Yakuza. Things were made worse for them with the adoption of an anti-gang law in 1991, altering considerably the policy of tolerance organized crime had enjoyed in Japan so far. Curiously, while this evolution led the Yakuza to enter a long but inescapable decline, the Yakuza film genre entered one of its more dynamic stages. This renewed vitality found its roots in the phenomenon of V-cinema. In a similar fashion as what had happened in animation with the popularity of OAV, the video market developed considerably, leading to a new production environment with films specifically made for this format. In this emerging market, Yakuza films were among the most popular. The phenomenon led to the discovery and the consecration of new major talents and filmmakers. For the actors, we had people such as Riki Takeuchi or Sho Aikawa. For directors, that's what happened with Masato Harada with his Tough series, Kyoshi Kurosawa with his Suit Yourself or Shoot Yourself, and the comical adventures of a duo of small-time Yakuza, and Takashi Miike, who worked extensively in this domain, making Jitsuroku-like films such as Deadly Outlaw Rika or Ambition Without Honor, but also some crazy variations such as Full Metal Yakuza, a Yakuza version of Robocop, or Ishi the Killer, a gore fest. This overall representation of Yakuza in V-cinema led to gangsters having a comeback as well in the Japanese theaters. But the filmmakers who tackled the Yakuza for the big screen during that time period were already well established in the Japanese film industry and brought a very unique angle to the subject. That's the case of Juzo Itami, known internationally for his Tampopo, with Mimbo, the gentle art of Japanese extortion, a comical take in which an hotel tried to resist to the intimidation tactics of the Yakuza, of Masato Harada after his success in V-cinema with Kamikaze Taxi, in which a small gangster on the run finds an unlikely ally in a Peruvian taxi driver, or Takashi Ishii with his Gonin, in which a group of economic refugees try to steal a Yakuza gang. But the filmmaker who had the biggest impact on the genre during that time was Takeshi Kitano. Kitano turned director in 1989 with Violent Cop, a project originally meant for Kinji Fukasaku, in which a vengeful policeman goes to extreme lengths to fight the criminals. Yakuza immediately became a staple of his cinema, be it in Sonatin, in which a group of them enjoy some time at the beach, or in his Outrage trilogy, a throwback to the old betrayals and gang power struggles seen in so many Jitsuroku, to Kid's Return on the destiny of two small delinquents, one of them ending up joining the Yakuza. His film mixed sudden bursts of violence with comical and poetic touch for a result always fascinating. This new vigor of the genre extended into the early 2000s but slowly faded with the following decade. If it would be highly exaggerated to say the genre is dead, Yakuza films are certainly at a low point those days, echoing the difficult situation the traditional Japanese criminal organizations are currently facing. Having to deal with the increasing pressure of the anti-gang law and the deteriorating public image, the Yakuza have seen their numbers dwindle and their activities becoming more and more underground. Those changes are most striking in Takeshi Kitano's Ryuzo 7, in which Yakuza are relics from the past, unable to fit anymore in modern Japan, or in Michito Fuji's Yakuza and the Family, following the rise and fall of a Yakuza based on the legislative and society evolutions of its last 30 years. With several hundreds of titles covering over 1 century of Japanese history, even if we only have access to the one made after the war, the Yakuza film genre is extremely rich. It covers a wide spectrum of images of the Yakuza, from the most idealized as a protector of the weak to a dangerous and destructive parasite. The reality of Japan organized crime is of course more complex and multi-shaped than what cinema has shown. But by looking at the different trends, we can still have a fairly accurate idea of what the Yakuza are and have been. Behind the codes of the genre, Yakuza films are a good way to see, through another angle, some of the issues the Japanese society had to deal with. Behind the virtuous attitude of the characters from the Ninkyo era, we can have a glimpse of a society in turmoil, shaken by numerous social struggles. Behind the violence and the cynicism of the Jitsuroku, we can find a wider rejection of authorities and institutions seen as corrupted and hypocrite. The feminization of the genre in the 1980s illustrated the increasing place of women in Japanese society. The renewal enjoyed in the 1990s highlighted the depression caused by the burst of the economic bubble and the multiculturality of Japan, far from the myth of its racial homogeneity. If Japanese cinema has greatly contributed to promote a mythical image of Yakuza in the archipelago, its impact has crossed the borders of Japan and reached the world. As soon as the early 1970s, American cinema showed some interest for the Ninkyo phenomenon, leading to the production of Sidney Pollack's aptly titled Yakuza, in which Ken Takakura teamed up with Robert Mitchum in a script from the Schrader brothers and Robert Town. Yakuza became regular opponents in American cinema at the end of the 1980s, early 1990s, when the US were overcome by a yellow scare because of the economic power Japan was enjoying thanks to the economic bubble. Michael Douglas hunted Yusaku Matsuda in Black Rain. Sean Connery faced Kai Hiroyuki Tagawa for Rising Sun. Still to this day, from Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift to the Wolverine, the Yakuza makes perfect bad guys for American cinema, bringing an exciting touch of exoticism to their productions and breathing life to the old racist fear of an Asian takeover and ultra-conformity. While Western cinema mostly made use of the visual gimmicks the Yakuza characters carried with them and didn't go further, other cinema have better digested the codes of the genre to make them their own. That was the case of Hong Kong, where the Ninkyo Eiga morphed into the heroic bloodshed during the second half of the 1980s. If you have managed to watch most of the Ninkyo films of the 60s, early 70s, you can still check John Woo and his imitators to have your fix of conflicts between duty and desire. If the golden age of Yakuza film is certainly behind us, it would be stupid to announce the death of the genre. Yakuza remain a constant of the Japanese society, even if their place and influence has considerably decreased. And if their presence in cinema is far below what it was before, they are still everywhere in Japanese popular culture, be it in literature, in manga, or in video games. No doubt we will still see more of the Yakuza in Japanese and international cinema for the years to come.